Hi, everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy, and I am joined on today's show by author, lecturer, and researcher, and of course, one of the most respected names in the UFO topic over the last few decades. A very warm welcome back to Mr. Richard Dolan. Richard, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great, Andy, and it's always nice to be back with you. Very glad to be here.
Well, we've left it 10 months since the last time, so a lot to catch up on, Richard. I catch up on your show very regularly. You're one of the headline speakers at this year's Contact in the Desert, running May 30th till June 3rd. We're going to get to details of that later in the show, but I want to talk first about a few different things. Like I say, when you were last on the podcast, it was June of last year, and since then, a whole lot has happened. We've had David Grusch coming forward, congressional hearings, revelations about potential locations of large buried craft, AARO's Historical Report Volume 1, the UAP Disclosure Act, all gave us some hope and then was roundly squashed before it could become enacted. Rumours of whistleblowers coming forward, and that's just a flavour, Richard, of what's happened over the last almost year. If we could hit on some of these points to start, that would be great. So, firstly, can I take you back to those congressional hearings last summer? And what was the immediate impact and legacy for you of those hearings from July?
Those hearings were historically very significant. In the history of the United States, Congress, there had been a kind of quasi hearing in the Congress relating to UFOs back in 1968. It was a one-day, I think they call it a symposium. But it wasn't really something in which members of Congress actively were asking questions. It was a situation in which a number of people just gave a kind of a presentation. It was useful. It was good. But that was it. That's really all that there ever has been. That was a one-day thing. And it dropped into the memory hole, and I think was just forgotten. And so for more than 55 years, nothing. There had been no interest by anyone of Congress in having something like this. And then we get this explosive hearing. I think, everyone talked about Grusch, and he is the most important of the three, but there was David Fravor and there was Ryan Graves, both of whom I think added some gravitas to it as well. But you've got a situation where in a live session of Congress, a man with very significant classified clearances, Grusch, went on the record and said, yes, we have alien craft and we have alien bodies. He called them biologics. And not only that, he said, I know exactly where some of these are located. I could give you the exact address. I just have to do that in the proper setting. That's, where I'm not giving up classified information, because that was a definite concern. So all of that was just incredible. Like that was, it's a funny thing. Like 10 years ago, had something like that happened, or 20 years ago, I would have been inclined to think this will be an avalanche of disclosure. There's nothing that can stop this. It's out. The secret is out. It's done. And yet here we are. It's been almost a full year later now. And it's not quite, but almost as if it didn't even happen. So that's an amazing place where we are at as a society, where we've had this drip of disclosure data that has come out in various amounts since really 2017. And it has not caused that avalanche that I've wondered about. I think many people probably assumed. So, yeah, where this is going to go is a really good question. It makes me wonder about further congressional hearings, which I'm very much in favor of. And it just makes me think, will they really do a lot? Like, there's talk. I don't want to keep jumping ahead here. I know you probably have an agenda, but you assume there are people out there who are similar to Grusch, and this is what I have been told, similar or even more explosive potentially, but certainly at that level. And that will be great if we can hear what they have to say. But will it really make a difference particularly in the political climate of the world today, of the United States, an election year? I don't have a whole lot of hope that future revelations are going to move that needle very much. But I will say the Grusch revelations last summer were very significant. I will just add, the movement to get a UAP Disclosure Act through. The original iteration of that act was, I think, very well put together. I since spoke behind the scenes to some people involved in putting that together. It was done very carefully, I think, with a lot of thought and foresight. But I think it's no surprise. It wasn't a surprise to the people putting this together. And I don't think it was a surprise to me, honestly, that it got stripped of a lot of its teeth before it was actually passed last December. So, what we're looking at is it's a battle. It's a national security state battle behind the scenes between two different factions. And it's just a lot more out in the open now than it used to be. But I think that is exactly what we're looking at.
You've touched on a few points I'd like to attack. The first one being what David Grusch said. I tend to judge any explosive revelations or progress in the States as to how much of an impact it has on the shores of the UK, because we are much more stiff upper lip in Britain. The UFO subject doesn't touch the mainstream very, very rarely, yet this did. This made waves for a long weekend. I think it was maybe the midweek, the Wednesday, for example, the hearings happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the Thursday, Friday, it was relatively decent sized news in the UK. It was gone by the Monday. I sort of expected that, though. And I wonder for you, what do the public need? Obviously, stateside, it was a lasting impact, a longer impact. And then for that to stay further afield, what do they need? Is it evidence, actual evidence, not just testimony?
Well, yes, that would have helped. But just to review how the news affected the American public, it's hard for those of us in the UFO community to get out of our little bubble and to see how the rest of the world reacts to some of this. And it's very easy, and I include myself here, it's very easy for me to get into this state of mind and thinking, okay, this is going to be a huge bombshell. It's going to change everything. And I mean, as it turns out, I have friends who don't follow UFOs and family and so forth. And the news really didn't reach a lot of people, or it did in a very vague way where there just wasn't a lot of information. So I think I don't really know how much of an impact it had here on this side of the Atlantic, to be honest with you. I don't think a lot. I think a little bit. But as far as how to have a bigger impact, I mean, one would think what Grusch had to say would have been enough to just, shatter the illusions that many people have had about this, but it wasn't enough. I honestly think the fundamentals is that we have both sides of the Atlantic. We live in a world of very, very controlled media. Yeah, we've got internet, yes, but there's also algorithms, and there's still big tech, and there's legacy media, and they are in the UK and in the US, I think, utterly corrupt, if I may say, probably beyond redemption. I just don't think there's any hope for them. And so as long as, they work hand in glove with the deep state on either side of the ocean, and that is what they do. And until they actually cover this in a genuinely serious way, people just don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the initiative to study this and to get on top of it. But had Grusch gone further and broken his security oaths and said, I know of a massive flying saucer at this hangar at this location, well, maybe it may have, I'm sure that would have made a bit of a difference. But he wasn't willing or able to do that.
I wonder, and that sort of ties into a smaller news item, but it made a splash in our UFO bubble, as you rightly say. Ross Coulthart mentioned that he had been told from a source, he never named that source, about a potential large craft that was discovered and had a building placed over it, a large buried UFO, essentially, that he knew of. He said it was what was the word he used? Almost like a functional building. It's used on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that was just being kept hidden. So it could have been a huge office block for all we know. I doubt it, but something like that. Is that the sort of thing you'd heard of before this? But then also I wonder if a David Grusch did give the address for something like that, Richard, what realistically is going to happen?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I had not, before Ross talked about that, I had not heard anything like that specifically. I did talk to Ross privately about this. I really like Ross Coulthart. I think he does great work for this field, and I think he's a good guy. And I think he really is sincere. He's got integrity, and he's working hard. And I know he has very high confidence in that story, and I have confidence that he knows what he's doing. So I'm sure that's a true story. I have very little doubt. But yeah, I mean, if something like that had been given up, I think this reality is a big part of the controversy that went into the UAP Disclosure Act. I think there's a lot of speculation. I certainly think, personally, that this whole controversy over eminent domain that was in the UAP Act initially, this idea that the United States government could seize private property due to national security concerns or interests in the public interest from private entities. Public domain, for those who follow it, usually would refer to, like, we want to build a highway through your property. Sorry, the public interest is too high. We're gonna pay you the worth of your property, and we're gonna take it and we're gonna build a road. That's eminent domain. To use eminent domain in this manner, that was indicated in the Schumer amendment to the NDAA, the Disclosure Act. That I'm not aware that had been done like that before. But that was a real terror, because the fear was that whoever is in control of that craft, if it's Lockheed or Boeing or Raytheon, a lot of people think Lockheed, but whoever, that they were physically incapable of moving that craft to another location. And so that's the problem. Like, if you have the ability to move your assets to a different secret location, then fine, you could let the act pass, and you could just pretend or lie if you're able to get away with that. Or you could at least play dumb and say, "Oh, we don't know what you're talking about." That's a dangerous game too, frankly, but that's a better option than what they were faced with, which was the inability whatsoever to move this presumably enormous craft that can't be moved easily or without a lot of attention. So yeah, it's a real problem. I suspect I don't know if it's an unsolvable problem, but it's not one that you'd want to be in charge of having to fix. That's got to be a difficult one.
Do you think, at the levels of secrecy that we're talking about, the levels of secrecy that you've researched for decades, that eminent domain would really mean what it means, that a private contractor who has this material, for example, would give it up that easily? There's one thing playing dumb, like you say, but there's also just the fact to say, no, we don't have it, come and find it, and it's buried 150 feet underground in some mountain range somewhere. That to me, it just seems too easy.
I think we're going to have to pry UFO truth out of their cold, dead fingers. That's how difficult it's going to be. There's too much for them to lose, and I think you're right. There's not going to be any genuine willingness to give up the information that they have, and that includes, that's not just the private entities, but that's definitely relevant people in the Pentagon and the intelligence community who have knowledge. I mean, we have to keep remembering that this UFO subject has been wrapped up with the Cold War and then the post-Cold War era in terms of national security right from the beginning. In terms of technology and science, that whatever has been learned from that, I think we have to assume has been very highly prized and is quite valuable and potentially quite powerful in all of its implications. So part of this is to keep the secret from the American public, yes, from the world public, yes, but part of it is also to keep whatever secrets they have from Russians, from China, from wherever else that they want to keep the secrets from. So there's never going to be a voluntary willingness on any of their part to give this up. And then on top of that, just opening up all these other questions, the whole scale of secrecy at some point, I keep thinking, is brain dead as so much of the global public is. I have to think that at some point, if this secret were to come out, that we have possession of technology and bodies, someone's going to start asking, how have you kept this secret for all of these decades for so long? Like, what does that say about our institutions? Yes, our public institutions have taken many major body blows to their credibility, but this would be a very big one. For a United States president, for example, to say to the public, well, I don't want you to believe in conspiracy theories because those are bad, but, well, the UFO one, yeah, that's true, but none of the other ones. Like, that's just not a good look for them. And it's also something that will just raise many questions about the legitimacy and honesty and dishonesty, I should say, of these major institutions. That includes the media, that includes our political institutions, that includes the academic world. You have to wonder, where has the world of universities been for all these years when all they've done is make fun of this subject? It shows really how clueless they have been. And you have to wonder, is it just that they're clueless and just not that smart? Or is there some level of collusion that's been involved? I think the latter. So there's a lot of uncomfortable things that will come out as a result of any kind of honest UFO, UAP disclosure. How much money has gone into this? I mean, maybe this is a mundane issue compared with some of the other ones, but it's important. I can assume they'll lie as much as possible. That's all they ever do is lie. But then you have to ask, is there a secret space program? Are there underground bases? What actual kind of exotic technology are you working on? How far with anti-gravitics have you actually gone? How extensive is this extraterrestrial presence, by the way, including abductions? These are all questions that would have to come up. How much of an ongoing alien presence do you know about? Because it seems to be a pretty large-scale operation. When I look around, I look at UFO reports all the time. This morning I woke up, I went through a bunch more, mostly from my USO book, but I read them all the time. I'm constantly reading UFO reports. And I can just say definitively that this phenomenon goes on in a major way every single day around the world. North America collects most of the reports. That is true. But that's only because of infrastructure. We've just got an easier to work with infrastructure for accepting UFO reports. But these are seen everywhere around the world all the time. This is a global phenomenon. What are they doing? What is prompting a global presence? And does it go beyond that? There are many hints that this phenomenon has things relating to space and time and the fabric of reality that would be a challenge to us. This is a can of worms that I see no motivation for the secrecy side of it to give up. The reason I believe that there has been any kind of outgrowth of any kind of movement toward openness over the past 6 years is because we've seen a faction that has developed. And, I know a number of those people. I'm not part of any group or faction here, but I am taking a guess that some people want to make some money. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of money in UFO tech. And if you know how to get access to that tech and to create an intellectual property rights or what have you, you would have an interest in breaking some of that wall of secrecy so that you could get access to some of that information. And I do wonder, it's just a hunch, but I suspect that there's a lot of truth to that. So you're just dealing with factional wars within the power structure that we have. And as a result of that, some information has come out, but how much will come out fully and how much can, I'll say this, the people who are managing the secret still have predominant control over major media. They still have predominant control over all the legacy media and over big tech. And those institutions will, as far as I can see, they continue to do the bidding of the national security community. So it could be a long time before people get what we really crave, which is just genuine honesty. Even if we don't get every single answer, I think people would be happy if we felt that our governments were working with us in good faith on this matter. But I don't think people have that idea, and I certainly don't have that idea. I don't think, speaking of the U.S. government, I don't think it has ever acted in good faith on this matter. Not ever trying to be truthful, ever. And I don't see that changing.
Well, I think if UFO disclosure, the movement, is a multi-pronged attack, there's a multi-pronged defence on the other side of that. And one of those points has been led by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who has been heading up AARO, as many folks will know now. He has since departed AARO, and we're still waiting on a permanent replacement coming in, or even what's going to happen with that entity itself. But I wonder, with the release of that historical report, Volume 1, certainly seeming to be a vague whitewash of much of the UFO topic as best it could be. What were your immediate thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was one of those things that if it were an actual university paper, you would have to fail it because, like when you're in school and you learn math, you're always said, show your work, show your work. He didn't show any of his work. So there were a lot of blanket statements made in that report with zero supporting evidence provided for any of it. So, for example, he made a couple of blanket statements about these objects all being explainable, with enough investigation. And the only reason some of them have not been explained is because we just didn't have enough data at hand. But he said, we are confident that these are all explainable. I'm like, well, what reports are you talking about exactly? We still don't have any specific examples of any of the cases that they have studied and debunked. Many of us would like to see what actually are these cases you're looking at. I have looked at hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands actually, of UAP reports of the 21st century alone. And so I'm curious, what is your methodology for explaining these all away? I'd be very interested to know. There was not any comment on the 2004 Nimitz encounter of the famed Tic Tac UFO. I would like to know what their explanation of that would be. Is that Russian technology? That'd be pretty funny. Chinese technology? That would even be funnier. In 2004 particularly, it's absurd, utterly absurd to say that. Is a U.S. black budget? Well, that would be interesting, but there's no hint of that either, frankly. And it doesn't look like it. So there's nothing like that. And then when he got into the historical justification, this was my area of knowledge. I've studied the history of the UFO subject a lot more than Sean Kirkpatrick has, I can say confidently. And so he's referring to Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, Blue Book Special Report number 14, and he's referring to the Condon Report. He's referred to the Robertson Panel, of all things. All of these, a lot of people who casually follow the UFO field, they don't know what these are, but I know what those were. And, for him to say that the 1953 Robertson Panel supports his conclusion that UFOs are conventional, that is just dishonest to the extreme. Anyone who's ever looked at the history of the Robertson Panel, which was a secret CIA organized study in January 1953, and the shenanigans that went on with the Robertson Panel, which were extreme. In fact, it was due to very, very good historical analysis that showed the conclusions of that panel were drafted before the panel met. The conclusions being, we need to disable, disarm, debunk the UFO subject for the public. We'll bring in our friends in the media like Walt Disney and movie stars, and we're just going to demystify the UFO subject because this is becoming too much of a problem. Anyway, the Kirkpatrick report, and I checked to see, was Kirkpatrick actually responsible for this report? Because his name doesn't appear on it. But yes, he was. That is what I was told definitively.
I think to your point, Richard, you said before, sorry, about the media. This, for me, report was for the media, for no one else, because they aren't going to care about the contents. They saw the conclusion being, there's nothing to this, let's move on, because that was then the headlines worldwide, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's how it is with every one of these UFO reports in the past. He mentioned the Condon Committee report from the late 1960s, which was a whole other thing with tremendous controversy and a mutiny midway through the project and all of this other stuff. And when that report came out, it was a big fat document, but all the media ever read was the conclusion by Edward Condon himself, which flew in the face of a lot of the evidence within the report. And he just said, yeah, the UFO subject offers nothing for science. It has no probative value, as he put it. And that's really all that the media read there as well. That was over 50 years ago. So it's an old story. I think these people know very well what they're doing. And the DOD, the Department of Defense, knows very, very well how to work the media. They are good, really, really good at that. So I think they knew darn well, we're going to put this out. We have a very compliant media, which they do. And that is exactly what happened. Yeah.
You mentioned the UFO, the conclusion there being that the UFO subject has nothing to offer science. And that takes me on nicely to, in November, the Sol Foundation, headed up by Gary Nolan and Peter Scaffish, were very complimentary, actually, Gary Nolan, of you on social media recently, just saying how much he'd expect you and how much people should be pointed towards your work. That event itself, what were your thoughts? Because that really did bring together science and academia in a very serious way to talk about UFOs, UAP, whatever you want to call them. And is that something you yourself could see yourself being a speaker at?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I communicate with those folks, and I think there's been some talk about inviting me for the next one. I certainly will consider that when it happens. I totally support the kind of thing that they're doing there. I will say, I don't think that I would agree with every presentation that was up there. And I'm not really going to try to even argue with it here, but I think it's a good idea. I think the academic community needs to do a little bit better when it comes to this. I think the academicians who talk about this need to get a little more nuts and boltsy about this, frankly. I think they're way too infatuated with the mystical aspects of the UFO subject, UAP subject, to a point where I think it's becoming counterproductive. I'm just going to say that. We're all entitled to our perspective, but I think that's how I feel. So I think there's a definite need to get a little more factual, a little more material, and actually to look at what is happening within the military and within actual people who are experiencing physical, actual UFO craft, which goes on a lot. I don't see a lot of that. There's still a big love affair that a lot of folks have with the so-called interdimensional elements of this and the mystical elements of it. And I'm not saying that there's nothing strange about the UFO phenomenon. There's a lot that's strange about it. And in all likelihood, there's an ability that these other beings have to manipulate what we would call our space and time reality. But that doesn't mean that they come from another dimension. I don't even know if we understand what that means. What is another dimension? Most people use these phrases without really understanding it. So, and then the other thing is, and I've had a very nice conversation with Carl Neff about this, and I like him very much personally. So, but I remember thinking he talked about this need to avoid catastrophic disclosure.
Yeah.
And I chatted with him after that a couple of months later. And he's a very brilliant man. He is a very brilliant man, I have to say. And so we were trying to hash out our opinion, because my attitude is, do you actually think that anyone, the United States government, anyone has a genuine ability to manage this process? How much control do you think you actually have? And by seeking to avoid catastrophic disclosure, are you interested in preserving what I personally consider to be an irredeemably corrupt structure of power, that is the United States Washington complex there, I think is beyond redemption. I'm done. I just think that there's no hope for those people running the U.S. national security state. I think there's no hope. So I don't really trust them to do any kind of genuine, honest disclosure that is in the public interest. I just do not. And so my disagreement with that concept, that alleged need to avoid catastrophic disclosure, had to do with my own personal take on the U.S. government. But look, I mean, Carl is an accomplished military officer. He's a patriot. He does believe in preserving what system that does exist, and I get that. I understand that position too. So, but that was, I think, the big theme out of that Sol Foundation conference was, I think, that concept, the need to go slowly, responsibly. Jacques Vallée had something similar to say, actually, in his lecture there. The need to go very, very slowly, very carefully with this disclosure. I mean, who are they protecting? As what I keep wondering, who's being protected here? I don't think I'm being protected. I don't think you are.
No, I understand that. And you're right when you say quite a few things you've mentioned there. So I'll speak personally here. I think in the UFO topic, what's needed more is the ability to debate and argue and have that as a reasoned debate and a reasoned argument. I'll say this honestly, I could see you being someone, not to blow smoke up your ass, to borrow an American phrase, as someone who can go to an event like the Sol Foundation and speak, and you could sit on a 4-person round table and speak to a Carl Nell, a Jacques Vallée, a Gary Nolan, and a Richard Dolan, and that panel does not look out of place. There are other events where I think a lot of the speakers who maybe want to talk about beings coming from the Pleiades and that sort of stuff doesn't interest me. I think it goes far too far the other way and lacks a lot of real evidence. I think there's a real place, though, for the future of this conversation where someone like yourself can be at a Sol Foundation on a stage and have that conversation with a Carl Nell and have a reasoned back and forward discussion where, do you know what, maybe something does change in Richard Dolan's mind, but also a Carl Nell says, do you know what, actually, I take that point on board. And that's where you can go away and actually work on something, create new concepts, come together, new ideas, rather than some folks who will peddle the same ideology and same ideas for 20, 30, 40 years with nothing changing when the whole world has changed around them. And that's where genuinely I could see someone like yourself at that panel being able to contribute, or that sort of event. And I think that's what you're saying, that you'd be more than happy to go and do.
Yeah, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I mean, I think that absolutely has happened. As I just mentioned, I did meet with Carl after that for something else, and we really got along great. Actually, I really liked him. I think we got along quite well, and we continue to communicate. So I think we're both probably open to hearing each other's perspectives on this. And the same, with Jacques Vallée. I mean, or Gary Nolan. I have high respect for both of those guys as well. But I mean, the thing is, there's this. It's a very different kind of perspective you get at Sol than what you would get at any other UFO conference for the past 20 plus years. Any other UFO conference, the attitude would always be way more activist. It would be like, we need disclosure now. And that's not necessarily realistic either. When you start getting into the deep weeds of what will disclosure, a true, honest disclosure, involve and entail. Well, I mean, I wrote a book about this 14 years ago. I co-authored a book where we did try to explore just how much would a genuine, honest disclosure rock our world. And even in 2010, when we published that book, I think our conclusion was this would be incredibly revolutionary, and there's no surprise why the powers that be are maintaining secrecy over this. It is a very revolutionary development. thing to acknowledge. So there's a lot of implications. I admit that. I would be happy with a controlled disclosure process if I had any of the slightest bit of confidence in my government's goodwill toward doing that. I just
And
don't.
that book, Richard, is AD After Disclosure, co-authored with Bryce Zabel, very popular in the Discord chat for the podcast. The guys in there and girls
Great.
are always talking about it. And that, I think, moves me on nicely to the real chunk and meaty part of the interview I want to get to. You mentioned earlier the book you're researching, and I think it ties in nicely with the Sol Foundation. Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet published the Sol's first white paper on USOs, that's unidentified submersible or submerged objects, underwater UFOs, essentially. This is something you have researched over 600 cases, I believe now, for your upcoming work. Yeah. So let's talk USOs. And I wonder, how much do you feel this is part of the conversation that, no pun intended, has gone under the radar?
Well, yes, it's a really fortuitous coincidence, frankly, that I decided to go into this subject at a time when I wasn't really quite aware that there were some other folks who were really going into this subject. So that's good. In fact, with Admiral Tim Gallaudet, I communicate with him, and he actually has an early PDF version of my book. I'm continually working that, but so he's aware of my work on this. But this is, it's a mind-blowing research. I have to say, for me personally, it's been mind-blowing. And for me to say that, I've been doing the UFO subject now for 30 years. And it's been a while since I've researched something that really made me feel that I was almost a newbie, like starting at square one. But the USO subject was kind of like that, because I don't think I really truly appreciated just how many good cases there are, and how scattered they have been all of these years. They're just in some in this database over here, and then there's another database there, and then there's this book over here, and a couple of blog posts over here. Like, they're just not put together in any coherent way. There have been a couple of decent books on the subject over the years, none of them comprehensive, not even attempting to be comprehensive. So I thought, I started doing this about 2 years ago in answering a question from a member of my website. I have a website called Richard Dolan Members, and someone was asking me about a case that took place in 1945 off the coast of the Aleutian Islands, between Alaska and Russia. And it's a pretty good case. I'd known a little bit about it, and I just did a little bit of a dive. And the object is believed, it's not known, but it's believed to have come out of the water and circled a U.S. transport ship at that time during the summer of 1945. So I did a little thing on that, and that was fun. And then I thought, let's take a look at a few other of these cases. And this is all in the late spring of 2022. And then I just got into more cases and more, and folks on my website liked it. And I ended up doing all of these private little presentations on all of these cases. And it just morphed into a full-on project. So I decided to access all of there's whatever major databases. So there's the National UFO Reporting Center, which is very difficult to go through, but I've gone through it. I've gone through that entire, figured out how I can do searches on it and all of that. I was able to access, before it folded, before it went away, the website of the late Carl Feindt, who just died a few years ago. Carl was a really great guy and an excellent researcher who focused on UFOs and their effects on water and the effects of water on UFOs. And that included a lot of USO cases, although his interest went beyond just USOs. It was anything with UFOs and water. So UFOs in rain or rainstorms, or UFOs in fog, or UFOs in snow. But he collected a lot of USO cases as well. And then MUFON was really gracious to me, and they gave me access to their CMS. That's their computer, their case management system. And then lots of other books. It's just a matter of hunting, finding used books, paying $60, $70 for a used book that's been out of print for 40 years, but it's got a couple of cases in there I need. So I was just scrounging them up and putting them together. And so what I've done is, I've collected more than 600 now. And I will have to publish it in 2 volumes simultaneously. So they'll both come out at the same time. But and I'm getting it illustrated. I've got a map. I've got a complete Google Earth map with pins with the location of every one of these cases, which I'll show that for the book somehow. And then I'm creating a bunch of appendices as well. So with each case, I've created about 15 categories for each case. Size of object, color, shape, distance of the witness to the object, and so and more. Did the object, was it transmedium? Did it enter the water? Did it emerge from the water? What type of body of water? Was it an ocean or a river or a lake or a reservoir or whatever? So I have all of these factors that I've put in for each one of these cases, and I'm just about done with those categories. So, and then once that's done, I need someone who's with good spreadsheet skills, who's going to put that together in a spreadsheet for me so I can do some proper analysis of that. And that'll be part of the book as well. So it's exciting. I think one thing I could say is, of the 600 plus cases, I can't definitively say that I know that every one of those is a bona fide USO case. But I will be very confident in saying that at least 3/4 probably are. I definitely think so. These are a lot of very specific testimony, and I think these are excellent cases. So you're talking about a worldwide phenomenon, every major body of water, and a shocking number of transmedium cases. They're not just below the water, in other words. They're coming out of the water. They're entering the water. They're entering and coming out, or they're coming out and then re-entering. Bizarre, really bizarre. It's fascinating, and there's several centuries worth of good ones. So I really try to be very careful. And how far back in time do I consider these cases to be legit? And I'm just going to say I have not found. I have a bit of a discussion on my attitude about the early alleged cases, such as they are. There's not that many anyway. But the first really definitively one that I could say, this one I believe did not occur until the 18th century, in the year 1717, not too far from Martinique in the Caribbean. That one I believe is probably legit. And then starting in the early 19th century, a bunch of really, really solid ones that are very, very well documented, well attested. But going back earlier, I'm not saying there were none, but I don't have a lot of confidence in any of the earlier ones.
Not to spoil the content, Richard, and it's been well researched, but for example, that 1717 event, what about it? It very quickly happened, and why is it genuine for you?
Yeah, that one took place. There was a French ship in the Caribbean. It was somewhere southwest of Martinique, and the captain of that ship, what the heck was his name? I'm going to search now. You're making me look for this.
No, that's all right.
It was a frigate known as La Valeur. Oh, and the captain was named the Chevalier de Ricourt. And he wrote in his ship's journal, and I have it right here. He says, at 2 a.m, this is in March 6, 1717. So a little over 300 years ago. He said, at 2 a.m, we were making some progress in a southeast direction. We saw something like the mast of a ship pass alongside, standing up about 2 feet above the water. And that's in his ship's journal. That's not the most solid USO case that I've ever come across, but it's not bad. Like, what I like about it is he's not trying to interpret it as a sign or as a portent from the heavens. He's very, very matter of fact. 2 in the morning, I was actually trying to find out where was the moon. Was there a full moon? It turns out there was a half moon. As far as I could tell, there was a half moon visible. So there was some visibility there. And, some ability to see hovering out like the mass of a ship. So I'm thinking a vertical object that was above the water that went by the ship. Now, that's not technically in the water. You couldn't say it's technically a USO, but I'd say close enough. It's a pretty darn good, what's that thing doing out there in 1717? A much better one was from a century later by an English ship not far from Hawaii. And I will mention that one. To me, this is a great one from 1825. And we have the exact date, August 12th, 1825. They were somewhere near Hawaii. I don't have the exact coordinates, but there was a ship, and on this ship was a medic named Andrew Bloxam, Bloxam, Bloxam. And he writes, now listen to this. This is quite amazing. 1825, about 3:30 this morning. So 3:30 a.m. So it's black. Other than whatever starlight or moonlight there was. At 3:30 this morning, the middle watch on deck was astonished to find everything around them suddenly illuminated. Turning their eyes eastward, they beheld a large, round, luminous body rising up about 7 degrees, apparently from the water, to the clouds, and falling again out of sight. And a second time, rising and falling. It was the color of a red-hot cannon shot and appeared about the size of the sun. It gave so great a light that a pin might be picked up on deck. So what's interesting is that you've got a situation where it happened 2 times, according to this testimony. And again, we're in 1825. No one's thinking about UFOs, obviously. It's farthest from his mind. It's, as far as they know, it's a natural occurrence. And indeed, you could ask, could this have been some kind of natural phosphorescence or natural occurrence? But I have not been able to find the slightest scientific support for any kind of naturalistic event. And I just don't know what it could be other than something artificial happening twice, giving off a great illumination. And by the way, this is something that is repeated, these orange orbs. This is a very particular subset of USO reports, are these orange orbs. They happen throughout the 20th century, and they happen in the 21st century as well. People are seeing apparently the same exact type of thing. So I think it's part of the same phenomenon.
Really interesting, the descriptive language used, like you say, because the immediate thoughts now would be flying saucer, drone, secret tech. None of that was in the lexicon back then. No one on a ship is expecting anything of the sort. Like you say, bioluminescent algae, which I only know that phrase from Moana. You could say under the water, but there's someone describing it coming out the water quite clearly, going up into the sky. And I wonder, in all that research, have you decided that we should treat, or you're going to treat, the USO subject differently to the UFO subject? Is there a marked difference in your research, your approach, or even to the origin of what these objects might be?
Well, a couple of things are different about this particular study that I'm doing. So this collection, and that's really what I'm calling it. It's a collection. So I'm taking each individual case and I'm rewriting it completely. Everything's being rewritten in as excellent a manner as I can to bring life to these cases. So a big portion of the book is simply one case after the next, after the next, after the next, so on. Now I have a lot of analysis that I have within each of those cases, and I have much more analysis I'm still going to write after I finish creating all of these categories, and I'll have a lot more to say. So in terms of any difference, I don't think I'll be handling it radically different than how I've handled UFO cases in the past. I mean, my goal is always to be I want to be as accurate as possible. I want to be as concise as possible, but not leaving out any important information. I do think this phenomenon is absolutely seamless with the rest of the UFO subject. That is, it's all part of the exact same phenomenon. I have no doubt about that. Lots of sightings of classic flying saucers coming into and coming out of the water. And since the latter part of the 20th century, a number of sightings of black triangles entering and exiting the water as well, which really makes me wonder, like, if black triangles are a creation of the black budget world, which some people think, well, they have the ability to go transmedium. So, I mean, it really makes you wonder, like, are we making all those black triangles or not? I tend to think that we're not making all of them. I don't have any reason to think that we've made a transmedium breakthrough in the distant or recent past. I just don't see any evidence for that. So these transmedium objects, I don't think any of them belong to us.
As you say, it's either a case that for the black triangles, for example, given they're a more recent phenomenon as such, they are either ours, and we have made them with hybrids, whatever that might be, and it's our tech, or it's something else that arrived here much later than whatever else was already here beforehand.
Right. Exactly.
And I wonder, to speculate as well, how much do you think these objects being underwater is to do with it's a quick hiding place, it's a quick place to explore, or I'm sure you've seen James Cameron's The Abyss, going back to the late 80s.
That's a great movie. Yeah.
And obviously, spoiler alert, folks, skip 30 seconds if you don't want to hear the ending. But essentially, you've got a whole other civilization living under our oceans. Is it too much of a stretch to think that could be a reality?
Yeah. The Abyss, I think, is one of the greatest, certainly one of the greatest alien movies ever made. And it's one of the best just kind of mystery movies. It's a fantastic movie. But what do they do? Well, I listened. I think this was on your podcast where I heard Kevin Knuth talking about this. I think it was with you. If not, forgive me. But I think he made some really astute comments about the reasons why a non-human intelligence would want to make their base in the oceans. It's probably a lot safer if you've got the ability to make a place for yourself below the oceans. The oceans, I think this is what he pointed out, have much more stable temperature fluctuations, for one. It's kind of nice. Much more stable, much greater ability to avoid atmospheric storms and other, volatility. If you've got a location deep down in the ocean, it protects you from perhaps maybe dangerous solar radiation if you're sensitive to that, and probably other kinds of airborne bacteria and viruses and whatnot. Like all of those would be probably dangerous for an alien species that's not from here. They can't just probably walk around safely on the surface of the planet. So you would, there would be a lot of good reasons to have a base under the ocean floor or inside an ocean mountain or something like that. That's quite secure. Again, assuming you've got the technology to be able to do that. But if they do, it would be actually great. And then here's the other reason. I've developed my own theory, I suppose, as to why these other beings are here now in large numbers. Like, I do think that we can make a pretty good case that there's been long-term observation by some group of us for a long period of time. I think some of the ancient early UFO stories do strike me as legit. A lot don't. I've become very, very difficult on some of these early cases. I think it's been way overstated, but that doesn't mean I think all of it is invalid. So I think a lot of it is valid. So I can imagine that we've been subject to study for a long time, but think of it from an alien point of view. For nearly all of our time here on this planet, we really really were not able to offer them much in the way of certainly what we knew about the world, our ability to manipulate the world. All of that was much more limited than it is until we discovered serious science. Really in the last 200 years is when we've really started to remake this world in a powerful way. And I believe that all of this was probably predictable by them. That is our trajectory. I think they were waiting for us to discover science. And I'm sure they knew this was inevitable. Maybe they helped us along the way. Totally possible. But we got there. And that's what's bringing them here in larger numbers. Because I think if there are any of the comparable types of numbers of visitation that we have today that would have happened 300 years ago, I think those people would have known and commented on it. Folks 300 years ago were very smart. They were looking at the sky a lot more than we do, probably. And I think they would have seen it, but they didn't. There was no comment on this, or very little, very limited compared to what we have today. So I think the reality is that this phenomenon has become significant in the last couple of centuries, and particularly from World War II. I think that's when it really ramped up to a major degree. And so if you're them, you're coming here, you're seeing this human species now becoming quite sophisticated. Electronic means of detecting you that did not exist recently before. Weapons that are actually getting quite serious. Hey, look, we've split the atom, created nuclear weapons, and we have a lot of other very pesky types of missiles and other weapons. Who's to say that they're not vulnerable to some of those? They could very well be vulnerable. And so they have to think, all right, we got to be careful about this. So we need to be here. This is important. These humans are about to leap into our world. We need to be on top of this. We need to monitor this. They're very aggressive. They're very territorial, just like us, probably. I'm guessing these other aliens are every bit as used to getting their own way as we are. But that's a whole other thing. But they will be wanting to monitor us. And where would they do it from? Well, a base from within the oceans could be quite secure and still a good place for them to go. Guaranteed that the United States Navy and the Royal Navy and the Russian Navy and now the Chinese Navy and probably a few others are wise to what is going on in some places of this planet as far as undersea activity. But they can't do anything about it. This is beyond their ability to deal with, I think. So so I think that's where they would be. I think the oceans and occasionally lakes and other bodies of fresh water as well make a lot of sense for them for a lot of reasons.
And I think if these entities aren't hampered by time or aging, how we are, for example, if they're robots or AI or their lifespan's far greater, if you ask me to watch a car for 5 minutes, Richard, well, you nip into the shop, that's fine. But if you ask me to watch it for a day, then I'm probably not going to do that. That's a long time, maybe as a favor, but for them, if that 5 minutes might as well be a day, then they experience time in a totally different way to them. They could wear it out under the oceans for centuries.
I've wondered. I've wondered about this. Like this idea of us being a long-term monitoring project. There are things about it that I think, yeah, it makes sense. And there's other things that, like what you're raising here, are difficult for me to grasp. I mean, we in our society have a difficult time planning anything even more than 10 years into the future, let alone 100 or let alone 1,000 or more than 1,000 years. Have we been actually monitored for that long a period of time? But there are, as I think you were kind of hinting at, there's a couple of workarounds. One would be some kind of artificial means monitoring stations that just are kind of automated in some way or another and can send information back. Like, yeah, I could see that, definitely. Some type of avatar situation, perhaps. But even so, like, it still assumes that their civilization, these ETs, we can call them that, may have a remarkable amount of stability to their society that we don't really have at this point. Maybe we will develop that. But for them to be able to have any kind of project that goes for even several centuries, let alone several thousand years, that's kind of mind-blowing to me. But it's not impossible, and I think it, you know, for me, I have to keep coming back down to the evidence. I mean, it's great to theorize. I love to theorize, but you always have to do it based on the information that we actually have. And what it does look like is that there has been a long-term presence, definitely for several centuries, and probably for many more centuries than that. And that's the reality. Like, someone has been here for a long time now. And I think they find us and this world very interesting. And they definitely want our water. A number of the cases that I've looked at, I didn't even include all of these cases that I found of objects sucking out pillars of water out of the oceans or bodies of fresh water. Frequently the oceans, just sucking up the water. I could go back. I mean, the thing was, in the early stages of my research, I passed by many of those cases. I said, well, they're not technically USOs. And as I kept encountering them, I thought probably should have included more of these, but I've included some. So they're interested in our water, but I think they're definitely interested in us.
Well, in one of your recent presentations, you mentioned some of the hot spots, Puerto Rico, Catalina, and others. I wonder, have you seen any correlating data between what happens in those areas? Is it more random? Is it, you know, geo-specific as to, are they collecting water? Are they monitoring navies, people?
I'll probably be able to answer that a little bit better in a month or two after I start going through, after I start analyzing the data that I'm categorizing. So I'm not done with that. But just observationally, there are a couple of other hotspots. So I'll just mention, the Caribbean, specifically around Puerto Rico, very, very much so. Catalina Island, the Channel Islands off the coast of LA, also very much so. One that gets overlooked is the northeastern coast of the US and Canada, which, when I look at it on my Google Earth, it's actually about as dense as the other places. And then there's other places in the world that probably are as equally big hotspots, but we don't get as much reporting. So off the coast of the Atlantic coast of South America, I suspect is significant. Definitely in East Asia, like the Sea of Japan, the Sea of Okhotsk, which is north of that. That region of the world, there's actually quite a bit of activity going on. There's quite a bit of activity in the Persian Gulf. And a few other places where seems to be a lot. The North Central Pacific has got a number of really interesting places. So, but in terms of looking for patterns, I'll probably be able to answer that better. Like, in other words, maybe you're asking, is there a certain type of craft that is seen more than others? And do they happen mostly in the daytime or at night? And those I'll be able to answer much more definitively after I do an analysis of this. It's hard to say right now, but there are definite hotspots. I mean, it's I don't know what else to say. It's fascinating. There's a lot of Navy cases. Most of these are not naval or military, but a lot of them are military Navy cases, written in usually by some guy who served in the U.S. Navy 20, 30 years earlier, and anonymously usually will write into some blog site and tell the story. One thing that people should know, this is relevant for disclosure, this is relevant for anything that the Pentagon has to say about this subject today, is that a number of these USOs have severely interrupted the operations of U.S. naval warships to the point where they have disrupted all communications for upwards of 30 minutes or more, where they have shut down other types of electronics on the ship, weapon systems, for example, non-functional, and even in some cases to the point of shutting the ship down in the water, like stopping the engine somehow, however that is even possible. But some of these ships have been said to be dead in the water with the appearance of these objects. And like for one U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I've got, I think, 4 cases in the 1950s alone in which that aircraft carrier encountered USOs. You know, I mean, it's quite remarkable. I have one case which is a mind-blowing case relating to another aircraft carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy from 1971. I have the date is July 2nd, 1971, where, in fact, in this case, an orange glowing sphere, again, just like in the 19th century case I was telling you. Well, the USS John F. Kennedy was in the just north of the Caribbean. It was in the Atlantic Ocean, probably north of Puerto Rico at the time. We don't know exactly where it was, but I think that's probably where it was. And they had just finished a series of qualifying tests, Qualcoms they're called. And the witness of this one was responsible for managing or monitoring 8 like teletypes in the communication center. So this is 1971. This is state of the art at the time. And these are all different communication systems by which information is coming in and going out of the ship. So in the evening, the ship had just finished a long flight operations period. He's in the communications room when he notices that all the teletypes are printing out nonsensical messages. In fact, all the ship's communications were down. And then he gets on the intercom, and somehow he's hearing someone on the other end yelling, top side of the ship, yelling, "It's God. It's the end of the world." And then he hears some other colleagues saying something. There's something hovering over the ship. So he goes outside to look, and he sees this huge orange pulsing spherical object. He says it was about the size of a beach ball held at arm's length. That's really large. Totally silent. It's giving off a kind of a warm light, about half the strength of sunlight. Now, keep in mind, this is evening, so it would be dark, but it's giving off some decent light, not as strong as the sun. Something like half a minute or a minute, he's looking at it. The ship goes to general quarters, that's battle station, so he's got to go back to his post for the next period of time. And what he said, though, is that during that entire time, it was at least an hour that they were on general quarters, the ship did not receive any messages during this time. The communication system was down for that entire hour. Meanwhile, the radar screens are glowing brightly during this entire event. So clearly this object was there for probably close to an hour. And then he mentioned that they had a couple of F-4 Phantom fighter jets. He said they were unable to start during the incident. And then, you know, what happens after the fact? He said, I didn't see these guys myself. They didn't speak to me, but I talked to a number of my colleagues. They said 3 or 4 guys in trench coats were interviewing key witnesses in the aftermath of that. And the only other thing he said was a couple of days later, this is all done, the ship's captain, I have his name, I wrote his name down, I'm trying to remember, Koch, Captain Koch, I think, said something like, well, you know, certain events that take place aboard a naval ship are classified and should not be discussed with anyone without a need to know. And that was all that was said about that, according to the guy. I think he said, you know, I don't think the guys in the trench coats realized that I had seen this for like half a minute. So he did not get interrogated. But that's 1971. That's a heck of a story. I read it and I wasn't there. I mean, can I prove? Well, no, I can't prove it. But the problem is it fits a pattern, a very, very distinct pattern that a lot of these military guys have offered over the many, many years. And, I mean, if we can ever FOIA these things, if we can get confirmation, great. But meanwhile, I think these stories are too important to ignore. So I'm collecting them to the best of my ability, trying to make them as vivid and accurate as I can so that they can be appreciated.
I can share two stories with you very briefly from a British point of view, from a gentleman who worked on nuclear submarines. We've got Fastlane in Scotland, and he would regularly be on tour or whatever you would call it with these. And I was a kid when he told me this, so they're very rough memory. The first one, and I asked him about UFOs at the time. I was like, anything weird happen under the water and stuff, because I had an interest when I was a kid in the subject. And he said, same thing, there's certain things can't really talk about because we're on nuclear submarines. But he told me once they were kind of bumped by something deep in the ocean, wherever they were. And he said sometimes things like whales, etc., would come up pretty close to them, and that it was quite common. And he said when they took a few bumps, and when they pulled up, I'm sure he said Florida, when they come above the water and they pull into the port, whatever you want to call it, there was a massive claw sticking out the top of the submarine. And he says whoever it was, part of the US Army, came up, took it away over a tarp, drove it away, and that was it. No more heard of it, which was a kind of weird thing. The other one was that I thought was more interesting. He said they were deep out and somewhere in the ocean, and there was a tapping on the side of the hull, but from the outside, as if something 5,000 feet under the water was actually outside the door. And he said it was some kind of mathematical equation was being tapped into the side of the hull, as if someone was literally outside going do, 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 and the guy with the Morse code on the ship was like deciphering it, and they were just it's like numbers, like a pattern of numbers. And that, again, he said that was the two things he kind of told me, where he was like,
I'd love to put those in my book. Those are great. Those are fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah, so I always found those interesting as a kid. Always kind of stuck with me. So pretty cool.
Not that many submarine stories. It's hard for me to find submarine stories. I've got more from the Soviet Union than from Western nations in terms of submarines. Most of the Navy cases that I'm finding are from surface ships, not submarines. Although there are some very good ones. The researcher Mark D'Antonio, American researcher, has a pretty good submarine story that I've got as well, where he was allowed to be on a U.S. submarine. Mark's he's still very cagey about some of the details. He doesn't feel that he can give up like where they were and what the submarine was. But just saying, he was within earshot. He was on one occasion on a U.S. nuclear sub where they they detected what they called a fast mover, which is their phrase for these things. And it was going several hundred knots per hour, which is much faster than any submarine can go. And he talked a little bit about his experience there. He didn't really get a lot more information, but there's not many submarine stories. So those ones that you shared are pretty interesting to me.
Well, I want to get to listener questions just to finish off. But one, I just spoke with your friend and colleague Ryan S. Wood on crash retrievals, a real hot button topic, one of the holy grails probably of the UFO topic. But I wonder, in your research, have you come across anything like a USO crash retrieval that's happened? If you could talk on that briefly.
Yes, I can. I'm thinking, can I pull this up? I don't know if I'm just going to do this from memory.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, there's actually a couple of cases where it is believed that there were attempts to retrieve an object. In fact, there's been some speculation of something called the Glomar Explorer, which is people can research this. It's a device that is designed to go way, way, way down to the ocean floor, like a claw, and grab in theory, like if the Soviets or the Russians were to leave something behind, maybe we could go grab it, this type of thing. So it was developed, I think, by Hughes Corporation. And I think that has been involved in retrievals of some of these USOs. There's one case that I included in my book from the late 1960s, around the time of the famous or infamous Shag Harbor incident off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, from 1967, which is a very famous, and that is a genuine USO case. But there's one ex-Navy guy who I have his entire story, where he learned that, how am I putting this? That the USS Nautilus, which was, I think it might have been the first nuclear-powered submarine, went through a major refit, an overhaul in the mid-60s. And as a result, after the refit, it was equipped with a kind of large double door system where it would be able to retrieve mid-sized, medium-sized USOs that were supposedly at the bottom of the sea. So, and that would have been in the late 60s where this could have happened. And I mean, it really makes me wonder, would the Nautilus have been even around, excuse me, in the area of Shag Harbor at that time? And I think it would have been, because it operated in the Atlantic Ocean. But anyway, there's a claim that that submarine itself was involved in USO retrieval operations. Whether it actually, according to the source of that, it did retrieve a number of them. How many, I'm not really sure, but it's a claim. It's one of these stories that just circulated very, very quietly, and then it made it to me. So I don't know if it's true. I spoke years ago to a man who has since gone public with his name. His name is David Noble Whitehorse. Served in the U.S. Navy in the early 60s. And I interviewed David well over a decade ago, about at least 10, 12 years ago. And he, in 1962, was involved in, he was part of something called Operation Dominic, which was a series of high-altitude nuclear detonations that the U.S. was doing throughout 1962. And a lot of these detonations took place over the Pacific Ocean. He was aboard a ship called the USS Finch, and they were, I think, about 500 miles off the coast of Hawaii at the time, near Johnston Atoll. That's what this was. My memory is all coming back. So he said they did a launch from that location, and he said, you know, what always used to happen back in those days is that there would be all these bogeys in the atmosphere, UFOs, and and just before detonation would occur, they would all hightail it out. They would disappear. He said, but this one did not. This one did not disappear. And he said, I was below deck during the test. We all had to be below deck, all non-essential personnel. But while the test was happening, an officer came down and said, I want you, and you up right now. I want you on deck. And so David goes up there with some other guys, and they're standing on one side of the ship, and their ocean sprays hitting them. It's intense. And they're ordered simply to observe and look straight ahead. It's very bizarre. This is exactly what he said, though. They were there to be a witness. And so what he witnessed was this object zooming by the ship horizontally at a very, very high rate of speed. He was doing a cross train with the radar people. And so he gets the scuttlebutt from the radar guys later that night, I think. And they're all saying, oh my God, we tracked this UFO. When we did the detonation, this object came down from the sky and crashed into the ocean. And as he was there, he said that we had several ships en route to the location where this ship went down, clearly to retrieve it. So we're in October of 1962. This is the same month of the Cuban Missile Crisis when this whole thing happened. And so that was all he knew about it for years. And then he said, some years later, he's still in the Navy in the early 70s, and he's at Guantanamo Bay, where the U.S. Navy has an installation there. and he's at a bar having a drink, and he talks to this other Navy guy who's having a drink, and they start sharing stories, and one's like, yeah, I've seen some weird stuff. And how it would go is like, oh yeah, well, let's see how weird your stuff is compared to my stuff. Turns out that they were both involved in the same event. And the other guy that he met was a top level Navy diver. And he had been the first guy to go to dive down to do initial visual recon of whatever it was that was down there. Now, that's a weird thing because I don't know how deep this guy could have gone, where he could have gone. The Pacific Ocean is really, 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 really deep. And a diver can't go down to the ocean floor. That's not possible. So I don't, it's not clear to me. But according to what David said, the guy somehow encountered this craft. He was able to get a look at it. He said it was honeycombed, somewhat translucent. He could almost see compartments and hive-like compartments in it. And actually was so nervous he lost bladder control, so he peed uncontrollably. Got very, very upset, very nervous, was taken up shortly after that and never went back. But that was his story. And it turned out they believed that was from the same event.
Wow.
So I don't know that it was from the same event, but it seemed like it was. That was what he said. The only objection I've always had is, where are you going to have, you can only go down so deep if you're a diver.
Yeah.
And I've never been able to square that one.
No, I get that. That makes sense. Listen, let's dive ourselves into some listener questions just to finish off for the short time we've got left. Newman is a member of your website and has said he's tried to ask this on many occasions, but he knows you're busy, so he wanted to try and get it on the podcast. He asks, with several anecdotal reports having mentioned complex interactions happening in proximity or under direct involvement of water, have we possibly neglected too much the role water seems to play, not just as a travel medium, but also possibly as a possible kind of fuel source that facilitates the function of UAP and NHI technology?
That's a fantastic question. Well, thank you, Newman. You're finally able to reach me through Andy's show. So, I have actually not even considered that. I didn't even think about that. So, and which is crazy because we've known, I mean, there have been human inventors trying to figure out ways of using water, actual water, to serve as a kind of fuel. And of course, if you're able to get hydrogen fuel cells, I mean, what is water? It's mostly hydrogen and oxygen. So in theory, it could be possible to do that. I don't know what the science of that is. And I probably will want to look into that because that's actually quite an interesting lead. So thank you, Newman. That was his name, Newman?
Newman, yeah, that's the,
Right.
well, that's Newman.
Right.
Newman always asks some very good questions, and if I had a spare hour, I would give you the context he sent along with the question as well. So they're always meticulously put together.
I've never thought of. I don't know if I should be embarrassed or not, but I've not thought of that. That's very interesting.
It's an interesting one. Question from Shardul. Shardul asks, UFOs are known to be interested in nuclear technology, and there are currently a total of 9 nuclear states across the world. Do you think these nations, especially those not fully aware of the phenomenon, are faced with a Stanislav Petrov conundrum daily? And I had to check Stanislav Petrov. He was the officer in 1983 who averted the Soviet missile crisis, the false alarm.
Okay. Well, these objects, these intelligences, I don't think there's any question they are very interested in our nuclear technology. Always have been, right from the beginning. I don't know if that's their number one concern, but it might be. And not always in a way that is positive, as he was just indicating. Stanislav Petrov, who, from what we have learned, an object seems to have enabled, not disabled, enabled the launch sequence of a Soviet nuclear missile, and the Russians were able to disable that at the last minute. But it makes me think that there are different factions of ET that are dealing with us, including maybe we can call them rogue factions. I mean, I'm just speculating and I wonder, but I really do think that that's possible. But I'm not really sure how to answer the question. It's like, he's asking, are we just kind of waltzing into not realizing the danger of the nuclear weapons in conjunction with ET? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, one of the recent states, I believe India has nuclear weapons, don't they?
Yeah.
And India are much more of an impoverished nation, as folks will know. And you wonder if they're not fully up to speed with, for example, India and Pakistan, very tense relationship.
Mm-hmm.
If these objects are flying around, you would imagine Russia, the US, China are more aware that there may be something in the air that isn't them, that their systems may be
Yes.
picking these things up. But are the Indians and the Pakistanis potentially hovering over the button, ready to go?
I think they are aware, actually. I think there's very good reason to think that the government of India is aware of this problem. There isn't a lot, but there is some Indian ufology that's out there. There are UFO stories that do come out of India pretty regularly, and many of them occur near the Himalayas. I'm just thinking of the Indian cases that I know of. Many of them up in the north. Now, Pakistan's over to the northwest part. Most of the cases I'm thinking of are in the north central, but still, I don't think there's any question that the Pakistanis, we're talking, yes, India per capita is poorer than most Western nations, but India's government is very sophisticated. Their military is highly, highly sophisticated. I have no doubt that they are well on top of this. Plus, they have hostilities, border hostilities, I should say, with China over areas like Tibet. So I think they are quite aware.
Do you think in the background, Richard, when one of these nations, an up-and-coming nation, develops nuclear capabilities, the US, the Russians, the Chinese maybe do have some kind of back-channel communication to say, look, there may be something you want to know about here in terms of issues we have had? Do you think that would even need to happen?
I would like to think that there is. There used to be. We know that there was. I mean, we know even Kennedy and Khrushchev back in the early 60s seemed to have some kind of communication going and possibly relating to the UFO subject. I mean, 11 days before Kennedy was assassinated on November 11th, 1963, he did sign a letter where he was apparently ordering the CIA to engage in transfer of information with the Soviets relating to UFOs to avoid confusion and to avoid an accidental war happening due to mistaking a UFO for some kind of nuclear or for a missile. This was explicitly something he was talking about. And then during the 1970s, we do know there were some agreements between the United States and the Soviet Union, again, to reinforce this type of dialogue relating to this. But where that has gone since the end of the Cold War, since the breakup of the Soviet Union, it's a really good question because it's not clear to me that the United States is really doing a lot with communicating some of these things with the Russians. I think communications with the Russians has reached an all-time low in our current era. You talk about the Crocus City massacre, which happened, in Moscow just last week. There's all of this controversy. What did the U.S. intelligence know about this? And why did the U.S. not tell the Russians more of what they apparently knew? They didn't tell them enough. So there's a very limited sharing of information. And does it go to the UFO sphere? Is a really good question. I don't know who knows the answer to that.
Richard, there's a lot of questions I'm going to have to get to another time with you just because we are running short now. But I wanted to ask you this one from Jag. He asks, had Richard heard anything about the potential signal discovery by SETI in the EU? And if so, does he have any thoughts? This came up recently on social media where Simon Holland had mentioned another professor who said she has heard SETI have detected signals and are getting more funding to go and chase this up, essentially.
I don't know much about that, so I'm going to have to look into that. That's very interesting.
I don't know the full details myself, but Simon Holland calls himself professor. He's not actually a professor, which in itself is an issue. But yeah, Dr. Andrew McGrillen here, I'm not a doctor. So yeah,
Okay.
but that's one I need to look into myself. But listen, let's finish off very quickly. This year, you are one of the headline speakers, as we say, at Contact in the Desert. That's May 30th till June 3rd at the Renaissance Esmeralda Resort and Spa, Indian Wells, California. The event can be in person or live streamed. Tell us about the event, Richard, and what you'll be doing there.
I don't, I haven't finalized my lectures, so I've been very, very naughty, and I need to get that done. And in fact, I was just talking with my wife about this today, and I need to give them my my titles and descriptions. So probably one will have something to do with my current USO research project. I did speak about that last year, but I'll have more and different things to say this year. I will very likely have something to say about the current status of the UAP disclosure scenario. And I'll be doing a third. I'm doing 2 lectures and a workshop, I believe. So I'll have a third topic that I need to decide what that will be.
I think you're on a few panels as well, by the looks of it.
Yeah.
You're on disclosure panel, you're on the legends panel. So you've got your work cut out for you over a few days, it looks like.
That'll be fine. Look, I mean, for me, I'm in an interesting position. I work on this subject literally full time every day. So my head is always in it. And so I don't, I'll be ready. Whatever we end up doing, I'll be ready to do. That'll be just fine. But I do need to get my lectures together on that. So I'm doing this book. I've actually got another book project I'm working on. We can talk about that another time. And I'm reading the audiobook version of Volume 2 of UFOs and National Security State. Finally, I'm trying to, because I've never been able to have an audiobook of that. No, I've tried to get other readers. The book's too long. So I decided I'm just doing this one myself. So I'm doing that in the evenings. But yeah, I've got to get these lectures ready. So I'm looking forward to it, though. I mean, that's become a really nice conference, Contact in the Desert, near Palm Springs, California, if someone can get out there. One thing that Tracy and I always really try hard to do is to be available for attendees who are there, and to just be there at our table to talk to people who want to come up and talk to us. So we try very hard to be visible there, and meet as many people as possible. That's always been important to me. People pay good money to go to these things, and they have every right to meet the speakers and the presenters who are there.
Awesome. Well, folks, if I've not got to your question, I'll prioritize you next time. I'll get Richard back on hopefully sooner than 10 months.
We'll do it sooner. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Get those tickets at contactinthedesert.com. Richard, very roughly, timescale on the USO book being finished?
A couple of months. Won't be that long. I was hoping for May, and I don't think May will happen. But I do think summer for sure. Summer for sure. July, I think, can absolutely happen.
And is that going to come out this year? Do you think the book actually will be out summer?
Oh yeah. That's what I mean. I think the book, both volumes, I think I'll have to publish it in 2 volumes, will be out. I'm gonna put myself on the line and say we'll have it on July of this year. I think that's a pretty good possibility. It's a good bet. The cases are done. The writing is pretty smooth. I need to get the rest of it illustrated, and I've got to get my appendices in there, but it's all coming together very well. So I think this summer the book, both volumes of it, will be published and they'll be available.
Well, we'll at least know it's going to be out before Luis Elizondo's book at this rate. So I look forward to that, and also Luis's book when it comes out. Yeah, well, I don't know. Do you know when his is coming out? I have no idea. It's not November. I can tell you that much, that people were saying online. There isn't a date for it yet. Oh, so it's farther out. Rumors going about it's going to be November. There's some publication dates on websites that are just, random dates. It's not correct. Lou himself has said multiple occasions there isn't a date for it. Well, so yeah. All right. So purely selfishly, I'm glad mine will get out there first, because he'll get all the attention once his comes out. So I'll get my book will have its little moment in the sun, and that'll be just fine. Well, people seem hungry for a book, so good time for it. Thank you for your time, Richard, and speak to you again soon. It was a total pleasure, Andy. Thank you for having me here.